This book is an absolute must on your shelf if you are a parent. The Whole Brain Child delivers in the most simplest way possible from the very first page explanations on how the brain develops, and also absolutely amazing examples that you can implement right from day one. So, next one. They have said, the Whole Brain Child, so they have said, we know that the brain have different parts, and different parts all work together. And we all know about the left-hand side of the brain, the logical, the part that does all the mathematical sides, and the right-hand, more creative side that helps us with non-verbal cues and the creativity and all of that. But they said we need to take it one step further, and we need to take a look at the brain from a horizontal point of view. So they said, if you look, the brain can be divided into an upstairs part and a downstairs part. The downstairs part, there's two levels to it. This brain model that they've developed goes into quite a bit of depth, and I'm trying to simplify it and keep it as short as possible, but it is just so incredibly interesting. So the first part of the downstairs brain is the reptilian brain, and this reptilian brain starts developing in the fetus in the first few weeks during that development, and it goes straight through till about 3 years of age. The reptilian brain is responsible for all those autonomic responses in your body, your blood pressure, your breathing, your heart rate, all of that. The next level of this brain is the mammalian brain. That's where all the emotions are. And this brain really starts to develop from about 18 months straight through till about 3-4 years of age. This brain, this emotional brain, continues to develop. The last part and the top part, what Dan Siegel refers to as the upper brain, is the neocortex. It's the primate brain. It's the thinking part of the brain. And that brain only really starts developing from the age of 3 to 4 up until 25. So if you've got teenagers in the room, by no means think that their brain has stopped growing. Their brain continues to grow up until the age of 25. Dan Siegel have developed this really interesting hand model of the brain. So for this purpose, I want to go back to my notes just to make sure that I can absolutely say every word that I'm supposed to and not miss a thing. But they say the more you understand about how your brain works, the more you can control your emotions. So they developed this very simple hand model, and it explains what happens in your brain when you suddenly lose control, or like Dan Siegel likes to refer to it, when you flip your lid. So if you put your thumb over the middle of your palm and you curl your fingers over your thumb, you have a model of the brain. The front side being the front side of your head, the knuckles, and the back of your hand is the back of your brain. The arm represents the central nervous system. If you lift your fingers up and you raise your thumb, the very first part of the nervous system over here is the reptile brain. If you put your thumb over the top, this is the limbic area, or more notably, the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for all those emotional and behavioral responses, like your survival responses. The fight, fright, or freeze response happens over there. When you curl your fingers over your thumb, you have the frontal cortex. And Dan Siegel calls this the upstairs brain, the master control area. An easy way to look at this, if you look at the hand model, is the upstairs part of the brain is the thinking part, and the downstairs part of the brain is the emotional part. So, have you ever flipped your lid? Have you ever completely lost it, that you have to stand back and think, who on earth am I? What is happening? Oh my goodness. Just driving up in Johannesburg up this way, it happens to me on a daily basis. So if you flipped your lid, it's basically your prefrontal region of your brain that's going offline. So your prefrontal region there at the top goes offline, and your emotional limbic downstairs feeling part is all online. You cannot think rationally. So this is what happens. The downstairs part fires. and it fires, and it fires. And eventually, the fire is too much, and the prefrontal region of the cortex in the brain goes offline. All sorts of factors can contribute to the upstairs brain going offline. Hunger, lack of sleep, someone touching those emotional buttons. Traumatic experiences, on top of that, sensitizes this limbic area, so that even minor stresses can cause you to flip your lid. And your upstairs brain goes offline, rational thinking goes out of the door, you have lost it. You have lost self-control, you have lost self-awareness, you have technically, temporarily lost your mind. So, how do we gain control again? How do we get our lids to go back down? We have to find a way to bring the prefrontal cortex back online. And you do this by redirecting your attention. So, you know, I'm trying to just fold here. If there's anybody here that's like really into their fitness, so you know if you're really into your fitness, soccer players, rugby players, netball players, you know that when you train and exercise to have optimal health, you need to practice and work out and balance all of the muscle groups. The same goes for the brain. So in a similar manner, you can flex your neuronal circuits by focusing your attention in a special way. That special way is mindfulness. It's meditation. And for children, it's play therapy. So with mindfulness, with play therapy, we teach the kids to bring that cortex back online. It reinforces neural connections, and it's harder for you to flip your lid next time. So, I know I just shared a lot of information, heavy information, and I think incredibly interesting information, because this hand model is an absolutely amazing way to explain to children why they might be behaving in a certain way. They've got no control. They don't realize what they're doing because that cortex area is not in control. It's all the emotions. So if we can teach them mindfulness ways to be able to stay online and not lose it and not flip their lids, that is essentially what will bring us to a harmonious world out there. So, one of the cool tricks that I want to share with you quickly is, if you want to do a very quick breathing exercise with your child that have gone offline, cross your arms like this, and flap. We call it a butterfly hug. Flap. And while you flap your hands like this, take a deep breath through your nose and exhale through your mouth slowly. One more time. And the last time. Can you guys feel it? Can you actually feel the difference in your body? It's unbelievable. Such a simple activity that we can teach our kids about mindfulness and breathing. So, your question to me is then, how does this all fit in with play therapy? There you go. The brain acts as a sculptor. It quietens down this amygdala. Play aids in the release of opioids and oxytocin, so you feel less aggressive, you feel calm, you feel that everything is well in your world, you feel safe in the world. Your immune system works better and you are able to learn better. Dealing with an out-of-control child that's flipped their lids is in the reptilian brain mode. It's only thinking about breathing, heart rate, all of that. It's not rationally thinking anymore. So, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? By bringing them into play therapy. So when a child is in a play therapy situation, in the playroom with me, during moments that they might be playing out a certain scene that have happened to them, whether it be grandpa that passed away or the bully at the school, they play these situations out within the playroom. And during those times is when I, as the therapist, guide them into mindfulness, guide them into becoming aware of the emotion that they are feeling, what's happening within their body, and how to create a way to deal with that emotion. Do you guys have any questions for me?
How young would you say is too young? Like what age would you start from explaining these concepts?
So play therapy is ideally from the age of 3 up until the age of 12. That's the ideal window. They have been doing some research on younger, smaller children, but if you look at the way that the brain develops, that the limbic area of the brain only really starts to develop at the age of 3. So they don't really have that emotional regulation just yet before that. But you can also do play therapy with adults, and you can bring the family into the playroom and everybody work together.
Okay.
Yeah?
I'd just like to know, how does anxiety develop in a child? And is it usual or common to have a child who is anxious?
That's a very good question. And yes, it is common. Every child is unique. I think that's the most important part that you always need to remember. Every child is unique, and every child is going to experience a situation differently. Someone might be able to cope with it and the other one might not be able to cope with it. So yes, anxiety is very real. And what we need to do is to help children become aware. If you read this book, The Whole Brain Child, if you get this book, this is really an absolutely amazing tool. And they say there that with anxiety, for instance, is you need to be able to name it, to tame it. That's one of the first lessons that they teach you there. So if a child has anxiety, is to talk to them about it. You have got anxiety. How does that make you feel? What can we do to help relieve that anxiety that you're feeling?
So you can never stop the anxiety. It's just about coping with the anxiety, basically.
That's a difficult one again. Obviously, you try to help them, to assist them to be able to cope with the anxiety, and you teach them skills as well to be able to deal with it, to become more resilient, to cope with anxiety. Hope that answers your question somewhat. Okay, my time is up. Thank you so very much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you so much, Sue-Ann. I really learned a lot there, and I think hopefully next term we can set up another little something where we can get some further information about what Sue-Ann does. Next we have Anine. She's our speech and language therapist. She works at the school. She's worked here for how many years? Many years. She doesn't just work with the children individually. She often gives the teachers advice as well. As teachers, if we find that maybe the children are struggling with following instructions or whatever it is, Anine will be the one to go to be like, Anine, please, you need to give me extra advice on how I can get these kids to follow instructions better. And she's the one that we go to. So she has many, many tips, and I'm sure she's going to share something very interesting today as well. Thank you.
Okay, what I'm hoping to do with you today is to just give you some ideas of what you can do with your children at home, okay? And just in terms of memory, auditory memory, and then also language. And I'm going to try and relate it to the reason why we need to do these things and why children need to have good auditory memory and language skills in terms of what happens when they come into a classroom like this in grade 1 and forevermore. As well. Okay. So what I want to start first of all about is just to talk a little bit about listening, okay, and children's ability or difficulty with listening. I've also had children, they're old now, and one of the things I learned as a parent is it's a lot easier to be a therapist than it is to be a parent. And even though I had lots and lots and lots of knowledge through all my wonderful degrees, etc., it wasn't so easy to implement it as a parent. But one of the things that I learned in terms of listening, that was a therapy tool, and that I did with my boys, was that it's very important to get children to listen to the first instruction. And that's something I was working with Hadron in the classroom as well, that sometimes as parents and as teachers and as therapists, if we're wanting a child to do something, we say it over and over again. Sit down, sit down, sit down. And what the child does is he or she works out that it's only at number 3 or number 4 or number 5 or whatever, when mom, dad, teacher, therapist voice goes a little bit higher or whatever happens with you, that then I have to listen. Okay, and then the child does. And what's very important is to try and get children to listen the first time. Okay, and the only way to do it is to break the habit. All right, and again, in terms of the great brain theory and everything, it takes all of us, children included, round about 3 weeks to break a habit. So it's quite a long time, okay? And so you have to be consistent for those 3 weeks if you're going to do it. But to say to your children, I'm going to speak once and no more, and to stick to it, okay? And then there will be consequences. Because if, for example, they want something, and you say, go to the kitchen and get it out of the cupboard, okay? And they don't listen, they're waiting for the third time to happen, they're not going to get what they want. All right, so because one of the things that happens in any classroom, and here we are sitting in a classroom, that even though I've got visual stuff, even though there was a PowerPoint, even though there's pictures on the wall, etc., learning takes place mainly, okay, which is different to TV and computers and cell phones, but learning takes mainly through the auditory, okay, through language. And if children are not used to listening, remembering, understanding language and speaking, they often have difficulty then learning. All right, and right from little, we need to help them with that kind of thing. Okay, so in terms of auditory memory, a simple book is a way that you can develop auditory memory. All right, now obviously this book has got pictures, so it's got the visual as well. So what I want to suggest to you that sometimes, because what we tend to do is we tend to read, all right, and we show the pictures at the same time. So sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes what I want you to do with your children when you're reading is say to them, okay, today I'm going to read you a few pages in a book, and you're going to just listen. And then I'll show you the pictures after you've told me what you can remember from the book. Okay, it's very simple. So you read. Okay, and this is all about children and a grandfather, and the children want the grandfather to read to them. And he says, yes, I will, but where are my glasses? And then they go around the house looking, and he says, are my glasses under the table? And they say, no, but look, here's a tie. All right, so, I mean, I've summarized it a bit, but I've read 4 pages to you, all right, without showing you the pictures. Then what you need to say to your child, okay, what happened in the story? And get them to tell it back to you. Okay, and what you need to look out for is, have they got the detail of the story, and are they telling it in the correct sequence? All right, the sequence of a story is very, very important. Being able to tell a story is very, very important. Okay, why? Not just because it's interesting to hear a story or we want to be able to communicate, but all of your oral language, the ability to be able to tell a story in the correct sequence, later on, when your child is once they get into grade 2, grade 3, etc., they're going to start to write stories. And if you can't tell a story in the correct sequence, you will not be able to write a story in the correct sequence. Okay? Reading and writing is simply language on paper. And if you don't have the language, you will have difficulty with reading and writing. Okay, one of the main problems in terms of, I'm sure you all read about the pearls in terms of reading. One of the main things that helps children to understand their reading, to comprehend their reading, is vocabulary, is language. Okay, children with poor vocabulary have difficulty understanding their reading, and we need to build it. Okay, children with poor auditory memory have difficulty being able to comprehend what they've read, because when you read, you have to remember. You have to do something with what you've read. Okay? If you struggle with remembering, things in the correct order, on an auditory level, the correct sequence, you often have difficulties with comprehension. All right? So it's a simple thing. Don't always read showing the pictures at the same time. Try sometimes to take the visual away. All right, and that's what I've just done. I've read, but I've taken the visual away. All right, then you can show them, because obviously it's nice to see the pictures. And you can say, look, there's the tie. Okay, and they can see the tie that was under the table. All right, okay. So just sometimes think auditory. All right, it's one of the most difficult things. And it's one of the things that many, many children, particularly in our new world, are struggling with, okay? And they're struggling with it because so much is visual. But so much of learning is actually auditory and language. All right. So read stories, ask them what happened in the book, and make sure that they also get the detail. Okay, so here, and what I mean by that is, here there are two children, Dumi and Zandi. So at some point you need to ask them, can you remember what the children's names were? Okay, that's some of the detail. It's easy to forget those kind of things. And you need to just sometimes get children to be able to do that as well. All right, so that's on an auditory memory level, where they remember the story and they remember it in the correct sequence. Okay. Then the other thing I wanted to show you was just a little bit in terms of language. So here, you might not all be able to see the pictures, and I'm going to try and show you. There's a story being built. Okay, so here's the first ones, 4 simple pictures. Okay, and it's a story about 2 men who are building a house. Okay, so we've got that one. Then they go on, to this one. Okay. Then they go onto the roof, and then there's the final one where the house is actually built. Okay, so you could start off with this one, and you could just say to the children, here the 2 men this is the first one. Okay, where they're digging it up and they're building, and they're starting to build the house. And you could stop there. And then you could go on to the next one, and you could say, oh, look, they're building the wall now, and they're putting in the window. And then you could go on to the next one, and you could say, oh, look, now we have the roof. Oh, and look, the house is built. Okay, very simple. But I want to say to you, that's not good enough. Okay, and it's not good enough because you're not helping the child to build their vocabulary and their language skills. Okay, that's really important. No matter what language the children speak, and no matter how many languages the children speak, that you do it in all languages. So if your children speak isiZulu and English, or Sesotho and English, you need to do these kind of things in both languages if you can, okay? But particularly in the language that is the dominant language. Not only the language of instruction, okay? So if your children have been brought up from little in isiZulu. You need to continue to develop that language, isiZulu, forevermore. Don't give up the language, okay? All right. Long ago, I used to go into malls with my 2 boys, and they used to run away from me sometimes. And they used to run away because sometimes I would see parents, and they would be Black African parents, and they would be speaking, they were young, and they would be speaking to these little kids in English, okay? And I would say to them, why are you speaking to your children in English? Do you have another language, okay? And they said, oh, yes, no, we obviously have isiZulu or whatever, Sesotho, but, you know, we want our children to speak English. So then I would start talking to them, and my boys would be standing somewhere else, saying, oh, Mom, can't you just, you know? But for me, I have a master's in the whole area of second language, and it was because I've always worked not only at Sacred Heart, but in many different schools in Limpopo, KwaZulu, etc., and with teachers and with parents. And I have a passion for language, okay, and for all languages. And it's really important to develop the mother tongue as well, if it's isiZulu, and not just English. Because in fact, if you develop isiZulu or Sesotho or whatever, you can then develop English. Okay, it's not one without the other. And that's really important. So if we just look at this little picture, because I'll also run out of time, there's a whole lot that we can talk about here in terms of vocabulary. So what would be important to speak about in terms of building the house is that it's a foundation. Okay, we start off with foundation, we dig it. What are they using? They're using spades. All right, okay, and there are a lot of children, even though we have a sandpit outside, that when you ask them, what are you digging with? What is this? They don't know the word for spade. Okay, all of that needs to be developed. We have to continually think about how do we develop our children's vocabulary. All right, how do we develop their structures in whatever language we're using? So we've got cement that we use. All right, and the men are using cement here. Okay, and there's a wheelbarrow. All of that. Okay, and we have to say, what is the wheelbarrow for? The wheelbarrow here, they have put the sand in it. And they've brought the sand in the wheelbarrow, and then how do we build the foundation? What do we use? The sand and the cement with the water, etc. Okay, and here with the roof, what has this man got in his hand? In order to build the roof, he's got a hammer. Okay, and those of you who have tools at home, please also show the children the tools and show them that there's a spanner, that there's a hammer, that there's a wrench, whatever the case might be, and build their vocabulary that way. Get the boys and the girls to be with you when you are building something or doing something, and talk all the time to them. Make sure that they understand, and then obviously say to them, like even in the car when you're coming to school, ask them questions as you're going along. So, I mean, I always use the example of if you see an accident, okay, on the way, then say to the children, they've seen the accident as you drive past, what do you think happened there? Why do you think there was that accident? Okay, if you drive along here, often they're police and they're stopping different people. Even if you say to the children, why do you think that policeman stopped that person? Did that person do something wrong? What could that person have done that was wrong? Okay. So all the time, talk to your children, increase their vocabulary, and make sure that their language structures are developing. And if you're worried at all about it, obviously the teachers can help you to know. Make sure that your children have developed language, both understanding of language and use of language, at the correct level for their age. And it keeps on going forevermore. All right. And that's why if you're reading books also, try and always read books that are a little bit above your child's language level. Okay, not way above, but just a little bit above your child's language level in order to increase their language. Okay.
When you walk through the high school quad, you get some children say, "Hi, Mrs. B," and others will say, "Hello," and others won't even notice that you walk past them. And it's not because they're being rude, it's just because of the phase that they are, the developmental stages that they're going through. And they believe that the whole world is watching them. They are the actors in a horror movie, and they are just waiting to mess up, and then the whole world will know that they are not the people that they present themselves to the world. So when you walk through the high school quad, that's the experience. You go into the primary school, "Hello Mrs. B, hello Mrs. B," an occasional hug. You come down here to the pre-primary school, and I literally had to, the one class, I literally almost was knocked over. So now I know when I see pre-primary school children, I literally stand like this in preparation for great big hugs. And it's all age-appropriate behaviour. So I want to spend a little bit of time with you, not talking about teenagers, but talking about how you can get ready for teenagers. And Catherine, you spoke, you asked the question about when is the right time to start involving, perhaps a therapist in play therapy. But I want to say to you, it's never too early to start getting ready for a teenager, okay? Because the very behavior that is present in your 1-year-old, your 2, 3-year-old, that's going to be present in your 13-year-old. And it's going to be on steroids in your 13-year-old. Now, just to reassure you, if you have survived the terrible twos and you're still sane, if you've managed the kind of the awesome foursome, then in actual fact you are coping well in terms of being ready for a teenager. So what are some really simple little tips that I can give you about being ready for a teenager? They are so obvious. And the first and most important thing is for you to be present to your children at all times, so that they know that when things are going really well, you're there to celebrate with them. But when things are not going as well, you are also there to listen to their concerns. So that availability is really, really important. Things are a little less hot, a little less distressing, and you acknowledge how proud you are of them for the steps that they've taken. So just like at the birthday party, the child hands over the present, you just say, so whisper in them, I'm so proud of you for handing over that present. Okay. And you're reinforcing and you're creating the behaviors at 5 years old that you want to see at 15, when the consequences are that much greater. When I talk about presence, the thing that I also want to emphasize is that even when you've got little children, and particularly if they're siblings, what I'd like to propose is that you find ways of spending one-on-one time with each of your children. Now, I had 2 sons, well, I have 2 sons. Darren was easy. I could say to him, do you want to do this the easy way or the hard way? He wouldn't even ask. He would just go easy way, boom, chung, very compliant. Justin came along 7 years later. I'd say to him, do you want to do it the easy way or the hard way? He'd say, what is the hard way? And then he would choose the hard way. And if there was some situation where I said to him, listen, I'm not happy with what's happening, I need you to take a time out. When I'd go and say tomorrow, you can come out of a time out, he would say to me, oh, I'm quite happy. Another 5 minutes. And the fact of the matter is I had these 2 very different children. When I would take Darren off, and so I'd go off to, because there was 7 years between them, the age difference was quite significant. And I would leave Justin behind and take Darren to the best place we would go was Colani Mall, where you sat in the mug and bean. We see the cars on the highway, which was very cool for him. And he would order a baby chino. I would have whatever was there, and we would just have a little chat. And that was something that I continued right through and still continue to do with my sons. It's a little harder now that Darren's in New York, but the fact of the matter is we call each other and we cook together when he's around. With Justin, we would go out and he would order sushi, but that's just because of the child he was. And he did give me a run for my money. But the thing that I can say to you is if you're speaking, if you're present to your children, those values may look like they vanish completely when they are teenagers. But in actual fact, they are there. So that's just a little picture of a friend of mine's daughter. She doesn't have the opportunity to take this youngster for special treats. I'm not sure I'm wild about McDonald's, but Ruru hadn't been to McDonald's ever, so we had a chat. And so do those little special things, because you cannot start those conversations. You cannot have the concerned parent switch on when you've got teenagers. Put all of those things in place much earlier on. And I say the same thing about devices, because there is a place for devices from an early age, but you have to be sitting next to your child. We have become very used to, in the old days it was a television that children were put in front of, now it's a phone. And the fact of the matter is, if that phone is put in front of a child without any engagement from you, what you are setting up is a pattern of behavior and a brain development that requires a kind of an instant gratification. And an inappropriate use of technology in the long run. If you are sitting next to your child and you choose a game, okay, and it can be any game, it can be age appropriate, and you play with your child, it could be word searches, it could be, even if it is just fun games. What you are doing is you are being present when that child is using technology. So when you've got a 13-year-old, or younger, but when you've got a 13-year-old and they've got their phone for the first time, okay, and you want to now start putting rules in place about access to that phone, it's not going to happen if they haven't been part of a process right from young, where you are able to work alongside them with that phone. And I want to say very categorically, that phone is a bone of contention. And I really want to propose that you do not get your child a cell phone that has access to the internet until they are in high school. And as I said, just like the party conversation, long before you have that conversation about, we want to get a phone, this is what we want to give it to you for, you need to make it clear that it's not the equivalent of the old diary that some people kept and hid under their pillow or in their bottom drawer, because there is no such thing as privacy anymore. So you've got to have those conversations long before the emotion and the excitement of having that phone is actually in their hands. So for me, technology is a neutral entity. It's how we as adults engage with it and role model it, but it's how we also then engage with our child in relation to that technology. Because there is this thing called the secret lives of teenagers, and it's like an iceberg. We see the tip, and we have got to find ways of getting a little bit further down that iceberg with our teenagers. They are much more vulnerable than they were when you were teenagers. And so we've got to put those support structures in place. And the same thing goes with body integrity and consent. So you may think that that's a conversation you only have later, but in actual fact, when you're going to the doctor, you say to your child, "We're going to go and see Dr. Siegel." Now, Dr. Siegel needs to see that part of your bottom that is causing a problem. So when we get there, he's going to ask you if he can just take down your pants and look at that part, but I'm going to stand here, okay? And then you make sure the doctor does that, okay? And so what you're doing is you're saying to the child, adults have to ask for permission, okay? Now, of course, people who groom children are a lot more, they're pretty smart. But the fact is, by putting small little hurdles in place and little barriers in place, and giving your child the confidence to say, "I don't like what you are doing," then in actual fact, you're empowering them, okay? And you are saying, this person has to give, you have to give consent, okay? You have to give permission. So when later on you're having those conversations that perhaps are of a little bit more intimate nature, you can raise the question of consent. And you can make it as simple as, serving a cup of tea. And I see Jenny's brought my tea.
The teachers are waiting.
Okay. So you, when you're serving guests, you say, "Do you have milk? Do you have sugar? Will you have rooibos? Will you have black tea?" Those are all examples of consent. And you can have that conversation with a 5-year-old. So what I'm saying to you is, it is never too early, when you are washing that little bubba, to be using the correct language associated with your child's body. Okay? May feel a little uncomfortable.